right now from the Richmond Times Dispatch. We want to welcome to the program Barton Hinkle. Barton, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I am fantastic. I appreciate you coming on the program. Your latest piece is at reason.com as well. An honest talk about guns. And you write, the most popular gun control proposals would have little effect. You say, while the most effective measures would be immensely unpopular. So let's start with that first bit here. The most popular gun control proposals would have little effect. You're talking about things like what exactly?
Well, I'm talking about things like background checks and assault rifle bans. And, you know, I'm probably not saying anything that your listeners are not familiar with, but if you look at most of the mass murders committed with firearms in the past couple of decades, most of them were committed with guns that were obtained legally. So they would not have been stopped by background checks. That was the case with, the Vesterly Flanagan killing of the two young reporters at WDBJ. It was the case in nearly all of them. And the same, and with regard to assault rifle bans, again, you probably know that if you look at the figures from the FBI Uniform Crime Reports, more people are killed each year with blunt instruments than are killed with rifles. So the idea that an assault rifle ban is going to do much to reduce violent crime is simply fallacious.
Yeah. And to that end, it's interesting. I mean, we have actually seen in recent months, Barton, anti-gun activists repeatedly say, while they use crimes like the murders in Roanoke, they'll come out with their statement of this is why we need common sense gun control. They won't always say what that common sense gun control proposal will be, but we had many anti-gun activists talk about the need for universal background checks, or the need to strengthen background checks, even though, as you say, in the case of the murderer in Roanoke, Virginia, he passed a background check. It strikes me. I was going to say it strikes me as a little odd, but it's more than a little odd, because this is something that we see time and time again now. It doesn't matter if the proposed gun law would have made a difference in this crime. Anti-gun activists will still use that crime to call for these proposed gun laws. Yeah,
and the phrase "common sense gun control" gets used so much that I think it's probably not accidental. Because if you say I'm in favor of common sense, well, then if you disagree with me, then you must be opposed to common sense, and nobody wants to be opposed to common sense. The trouble is that there's really not a lot of common sense once you peel back the onion a little bit and see exactly what it is that we're talking about here.
So you say the most effective measures would be immensely unpopular. When you talk about the effective measures, you're talking about an outright ban on firearms and then somehow actually confiscating those firearms, taking those guns away.
Yeah, sure. And to their credit, some advocates of gun control are, they're honest enough to say, look, I think we need to repeal, overwrite the Second Amendment, and we need to ban civilian ownership of firearms except in extremely limited circumstances where, for example, you got to keep it at the firing range under lock and key, and that's the only place that you can have it. And there are some who say that. But, even many gun control advocates don't want to go that far. But I think it's important for gun rights advocates to admit that if we could wave a magic wand and get rid of all firearms in the country today, nobody would be shot tomorrow.
Yeah, but again, I mean, now to me, we start talking about this, we immediately go into hypotheticals, because this as well as I do, Barton. I mean, we could somehow, if the anti-gun forces could somehow muster the votes in Congress and across the country to repeal the Second Amendment. Well, you've repealed the Second Amendment. You haven't then taken any guns out of the hands of people. So they'd have to figure out a mechanism by which to do that. Then I think, why would we keep hearing anti-gun activists talk about Australia? They love to bring up Australia, right? Australia passed what they say are, quote, common sense gun regulations, and things have been great in Australia ever since, or so they say. I'm not sure that even if they were able to repeal the Second Amendment and somehow find a way by which they could remove some 300 million privately owned firearms in the United States, I don't think we'd end up like Australia. I don't think we would end up like Japan. I think we would very quickly turn into Mexico, frankly, and the crime rate that we see there. We would not be getting rid of crime. We would not be getting rid of the drug cartels and the influence that they have in the United States, right? None of that would change. So why would we not turn into a nation that looks like Mexico with all of its crime problems?
Yeah, well, that's certainly a fair argument. And I think there's also something to the argument that America is regrettably an inherently more violent country than places like Japan or perhaps, parts of Great Britain, I don't know. And I would have to go into the statistics and compare the per capita killings with knives and blunt instruments across countries, and I haven't done that yet, so I don't want to say that definitively. But sure, if you were simply to pass a law banning civilian ownership of firearms, you're still going to end up with cases like Charlie Hebdo. You're still going to end up with cases in which we can't keep drugs out of state penitentiaries, so we're not going to keep guns off the streets entirely. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and this is why, when you write in your piece, An Honest Talk About Guns, at the end of your piece, you say, so if we tried all of these, what they would consider to be, quote-unquote, common sense measures, and if we didn't see a big drop in of violent crime or firearms killings, would gun control advocates say, well, we tried all the common sense measures, so now there's nothing more we can do? Or would they, you say, press for even more stringent restrictions? Would they then say, all right, well, now it's time to repeal the Second Amendment? I mean, we know where we're going, and we know that these laws that they're proposing don't really have much of an impact. It's one of the reasons why, as I've been thinking more and more about this issue, guys like David Kennedy have really been intriguing. His book, Don't Shoot, talking about the ceasefire program in Boston and the idea that you target the most violent offenders. It's not about getting guns off the street. It's not about getting drugs off the street. It's about getting people to stop shooting other people. And that's where you put your focus. You focus on the worst offenders. You offer them a pathway to get out of the gangs and to stop what they're doing. And if they don't take that path, then they go to prison for a long time. That seems to drive down the violent crime rate.
Yeah, and to that point, as I think I mentioned in the column, over the past 20 years or so, gun homicide rates have dropped by half. Mm-hmm. And that has occurred during a period in which most states have relaxed restrictions on gun ownership and increased the ability of concealed carry permits, issuing those by right, and so forth. So we can, in fact, reduce the frequency of violent crime and violent crime committed with guns without restricting the rights of the 60 million or whatever the correct number is of